Abouna Luka, he wrote in his memoirs about his imprisonment. There was a time where he was imprisoned when he was in Egypt along with some other fathers and some other laymen. It was a very difficult time. When we go to prison here in this country, there is a set amount of time that you know beforehand. But in other countries, when you go to prison, you don't know if you're ever going to leave. And so if you think about it, going to prison in a place like Egypt during that time, during that upheaval, I remember Abouna telling me he didn't know that if he was ever going to get out. And he writes about going to prison. He says, after they took him from his house in the middle of the night, and they drove him to the prison, and they took him to his cell, he says, what was 8 centimeters by 8 centimeters was an opening. Otherwise, it was just this small room. And he says in his book that sometimes they would lay on the floor just to take a few breaths from the opening of the door because the cell smelled so strong. And he writes, the first thing it's very touching to think of this, because I think, what would I do in this situation? But he writes, the first thing we did when we entered was to prostrate on the floor. They worshiped God in a real act of worship. When we say worship God in fear and trembling, we go down on the floor and we worship before Him. The first thing that these men did in this very difficult circumstance was worship God. And we prayed a very long, deep prayer. He writes, filled with joy and condolences. I remember quite well how the words of this prayer were engulfed with grace and satisfaction bestowed upon us by the Lord. It's such a beautiful thing to say about such a difficult circumstance, and it's something when we read, we're encouraged by. We say, I wonder if I'm put in a difficult situation such as this, would I be able to worship my Lord? Would I be able to say thank you for this thing? The Lord Christ also encourages us, obviously, in our difficult circumstances all the time. St. Peter writes in his epistle, chapter 3, verse 15, is the first epistle of St. Peter, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you.